When I stepped into the apartment, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Outside, rain was still falling, tapping against the pavement, shimmering under the dim yellow glow of the streetlights. The drizzle had followed me the entire walk home, steady and constant, a soft white noise that usually felt calming. But the moment I closed the door behind me, it was as if I had sealed myself inside a vacuum. No hum of televisions leaking through thin walls. No faint footsteps from the upstairs neighbors. No laughter, no voices. Just silence, thick and absolute. I slipped off my shoes, hung my damp coat, and walked into the living room. Normally, I loved the quiet after a long day. It was a small comfort, a way to recharge. Tonight, though, the silence wasn't soothing. It was heavy, suffocating, pressing down until I could hardly breathe. I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited for it to boil. The click of the button sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. The water bubbled, steam rose, and soon I poured myself a cup of tea. I carried it carefully into the living room and sat down on the couch. The steam curled upward, warm against my face, but it didn't relax me. My eyes wandered, searching for anything to break the stillness. That was when I noticed the mirror across from the couch. At first it was just me, my face, tired but familiar. My shoulders slouched, my hair slightly damp from the rain. But then I realized something was wrong. The eyes in the reflection weren't aligned with mine. They weren't looking straight back at me, they were slightly off, staring somewhere else, as if the reflection had its own point of focus. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The image was normal. My reflection was my own once more, perfectly aligned. "I'm just tired," I whispered to myself, though my voice trembled. I sipped my tea, the warmth sliding down my throat, but the unease lingered. The quiet seemed alive now, shifting around me. Every second I stayed still, it thickened. Time passed, though I couldn't say how much. Minutes? Hours? The longer I sat there, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Every tiny sound grew amplified in the silence. The refrigerator's low hum, the faint creak of the wooden floorboards adjusting, the rhythmic patter of raindrops against the window. They were so ordinary, yet in that stillness, they sounded unnatural, almost hostile, like intrusions in a place that didn't want them. I tried reading. I opened a book, forced my eyes across the lines, but the words swam. My gaze kept darting to the corners of the room, where shadows pooled thickly. The curtains seemed to shift, though the window was closed. A shadow slipped across the hallway, but when I turned, nothing was there. "Drafts, tricks of the eye," I muttered, my voice oddly loud in the still air. But just past midnight, the sounds changed. At first it was faint, almost uncertain. Then clearer. Footsteps, not above me, not next door, but in my hallway. Slow, deliberate. The soft scrape of something dragging across the floor accompanied them, like fabric brushing wood. My whole body froze. A part of me wanted to dismiss it. Neighbors, old pipes, anything, but deep down, I knew. The sound had come from inside my apartment. My hand trembled as I grabbed my phone. My thumb hovered over my contacts list, but who would I call? What would I even say? That I heard a noise, that silence was too heavy. I forced myself up, legs shaky, and walked toward the hallway. I flicked on the light. Nothing. Shoes neatly lined by the door, the lock secure, everything exactly where it should be. Relief washed over me for a moment, fragile and fleeting. But then, a clink from the kitchen. I turned sharply. My teacup, the one I had left on the table, had moved. Just an inch, maybe two, but enough that I noticed the damp ring it left behind on the surface. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "It's nothing." I must have nudged it without realizing, I told myself, but my voice sounded hollow, desperate. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed noise, anything to drown out the suffocating stillness. I grabbed the remote and turned on the television. Static filled the screen before the channels clicked by in rapid succession. Finally, I landed on a music program, and the sound of voices and instruments filled the room. Relief washed over me in waves. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. On the far end of the couch, the fabric sank, just slightly, as though someone had sat down. My breath caught in my throat. When I turned my head, there was nothing there, just the smooth, empty cushion. No one. And yet, for a moment, the indentation remained, before slowly rising back to its normal shape, as if unseen weight had just lifted. Panic fluttered in my chest, sharp and insistent. I couldn't focus. I picked up my phone again, desperate for connection, for proof that I wasn't alone. I typed a message to a friend. "Are you awake?" Before I could send it, the screen went black. My phone shut down. The battery had been full. I pressed the button again and again, but nothing happened. The screen stayed dark. That was when the sound came from the kitchen. Not a faint noise this time, but a sharp, unmistakable scrape of wood against tile. A chair being dragged. My body went rigid. The sound echoed into the living room, loud, deliberate, as if whatever was there wanted me to hear it. And then, faintly, so faintly, I almost convinced myself I imagined it, I heard a whisper from the darkness beyond the doorway. You're not alone. My knees nearly gave out. My breath came in shallow bursts, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I stared at the kitchen door, half expecting something to emerge. Nothing did. I don't know where the strength came from, but I forced myself to move. One step at a time, I crept toward the kitchen and flipped the light on. Everything looked ordinary. Plates stacked neatly, countertops clean. But one of the chairs was wrong. It had been pushed several feet back from the table, angled as if someone had been sitting there, watching. My mind scrambled for logic. Had I moved it earlier? Did I forget? No, I would have noticed. I was sure of it. I backed out, heart hammering. When I returned to the living room, the television was off. The screen was black. At first, I thought it had shut itself down, maybe a power surge. But then I saw a reflection in the dark glass. It was me, except it wasn't. The figure on the screen had my face, but the eyes were empty, lifeless voids. The mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, frozen in a scream so silent, it pierced me all the same. My chest clenched, my breath caught. I stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table, crashing to the floor. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. Only my own pale, terrified face stared back at me. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This is in my head. Just hallucinations, tricks of exhaustion." But how do you explain a moved chair? A shifted cup, the weight on the couch, the whisper. I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock until it clicked. I threw myself onto the bed and pulled the blanket over me like a shield. My body shook violently, every muscle tight with fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face again, closer, clearer, its scream widening, pressing against the inside of my skull. The hours stretched into eternity. I don't know if I slept or simply drifted in and out of feverish half-dreams. Shadows twisted on the walls. Whispers coiled in the corners of the room. Every so often, the door handle rattled, soft at first, then more insistent, until I covered my ears and begged for it to stop. And then, at last light, the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, faint, but enough to push the night back. The air shifted. The silence was still there, but it no longer pressed so hard against my chest. I forced myself to stand. My legs were weak, trembling, but I moved. Step by step, I unlocked the door and walked through the apartment. Everything looked normal. The cup on the table, the chair at the kitchen table, perfectly aligned, as though they had never been disturbed. The television off, the remote where I had left it. No trace of the night before. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I had dreamed it all. My mind wanted desperately to believe it. And then I looked in the mirror. The face that stared back at me was mine, but the eyes were the same as the ones I had seen in the screen the night before, hollow, empty, and in that moment, I knew the truth. I hadn't been alone. I was never alone. The thing I saw wasn't some intruder lurking in the shadows of my apartment. It was inside me, and it was still here.